Now formally welcome our speakers, who will be well known, I'm sure, to all of you. In first name alphabetical order, Eluned Morgan, who's Minister in Welsh Government from the Labour Party. Emily Durrant, political spokesperson on rural affairs from the Green Party. Finch Saunders, Shadow Minister for Energy, Environment and Rural Affairs from the Conservative Party. Jane Dodds, leader of the Liberal Democrats in Wales. Llyr Gruffydd, Shadow Minister for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs from Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales. Again, following the alphabetical order issue, Eluned, could I possibly ask you to set out what your vision is for agriculture and rural affairs in Wales for a couple of minutes or so? Diolch yn fawr.
There we go. Diolch yn fawr, Roger, a diolch yn fawr i'ch aelodau chi am ymuno heno. Thanks very much for the invitation to come to address you this evening. I'll just try and keep it very brief. First of all, it's been a really tumultuous few years, and there's always been, I always feel like the agricultural community lived through tumultuous times, but I certainly feel that the challenges that we're up against, not just in the agricultural community and rural communities, but more broadly, Brexit, COVID, climate change, and the need to preserve biodiversity, we need to challenge all of these issues, and we need to adapt and respond to what's ahead of us. I think the issue of a hard Brexit is going to cause disruption for many years to come. We saw the impact of COVID in particular on the dairy sector. And I think when it comes to climate change, we feel like we do have a responsibility to act now. When it comes to climate change, we take this extremely seriously, and that's why we have a target to get to net zero by 2050. But we've done that in lots of ways. We've got lots of things we've already done. We've protected 70,000 homes from flooding, put 60,000 worth energy efficiency measures into places. And of course, we've also put regulations in place to try and reduce agricultural pollution. One of the key things for me is to understand the symbiotic relationship between agricultural, rural communities and tourism. The key for me is that we need to make sure we've got a balanced approach where we have very clear goals, where we protect agriculture and prosperity and also the environment. And we need to base our decisions on science and make sure that when we produce products in Wales that are of quality, as we expect from your members, then we are able then to promote it around the world. You'll be aware that we have plans to introduce a new agricultural act for Wales, where we will set minimum standards, which will replace the basic payment scheme and other EU environmental schemes with one single direct support scheme for farming. We have the same ambition as you, that is to make sure that we can have profitable and sustainable farming. What is interesting, of course, is that we made some promises during that Brexit campaign. Others made promises, like the fact that the money that came to rural areas would be preserved. That has not happened. The Tories did not adhere to their promises. They made a cut of 137 million of payments that used to come to rural communities via the EU. So let's be clear that we are worse off now because of those cuts from the Tory government that were promised. We are very keen also to see a national forest for Wales being developed, and we would hope that some of your members would take the opportunity to help us to create that and to create a sustainable timber industry in Wales. We have a national model for regulation of animal welfare, and we'll be doing more in that space. And we know that as people who look after the countryside and animal welfare, that you will be in the front line of that. You talked about connected country. We have an ambition to get 30% of people now working from home. We know now that it can be done, but as you say, Wi-Fi and mobile connectivity is absolutely key. And that's why we've had to step in where the Tory party should have been doing this on behalf of the UK government. It's their responsibility. We've had to spend literally hundreds of millions of pounds making up for the fact that they haven't done their job. And we're keen to make sure that that happens. We want to see balanced development between conservation and in particular in national parks areas. And we're very keen to make sure that the skills that are needed in rural communities to keep young people here, make sure that they can afford local housing, is all in place. And those are some of the things that we'll be doing if we are re-elected to lead Wales.
Diolch, Eluned. I'm going to pass quickly on to Emily, again in alphabetical order, just to set up your vision, Emily, please.
Thank you, Nigel, and thanks for having me tonight. I am probably your wild card because everybody else here has been elected before, so I'm going to take a small amount of time introducing myself to people who don't know who I am. So Nigel introduced me as the rural spokesperson. I'm also the lead list candidate for the Mid and West Wales region, and I'm the Green Party candidate for Brecon and Radnorshire constituency. So I grew up in a city, and through a number of family tragedies, we ended up moving to a rural area, and I was fish out of water. I grew up in a very poor setting, and we didn't have much money, and I spent all my days in the fields, as you do. Had no idea about any of it, just enjoyed it, as you know, as people do who don't actually live that life. And for some inexplicable reason, I have been completely obsessed with farming ever since I was a teenager. I have directed my entire career to understanding how we relate to the land, how we as a society, but also how communities, as individuals, food companies, tourism, everything else, how we kind of interact with the land, and how we use the land to our kind of shared benefit. I've worked for corporates looking at sustainable supply chains, for global companies, including...
Can I pull you back to the Green Party, Emily? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So a huge range of different experiences, and also working with farmers. And out of all of this, I have had quite a significant hand in developing the food and farming area of the Green Party Manifesto. The manifesto for me is about saying the Green Party is the party that really wants to put the future of farming at the centre of the policy. And that doesn't mean leaving farmers behind who are currently farming. That means front-loading investment in the farming community and in rural communities. So I see a farming industry where we produce a whole lot more food that we actually consume in Wales, partly because that brings huge benefits for nature. Diverse farming is really, really good for nature. I mean, a farmed environment, in my view, is actually more supportive of biodiversity than so-called wilderness. And that is an established fact from a number of people. But I'm not talking about, unfortunately, not intensive modern farming, lots of chemicals. So we're looking at what we might call more an agroecological system. And I know not everybody likes that phrase, but basically that's all about farming within environmental limits. And farming for as much local production as possible. So we want a lot of investment in local food economies, very supportive of tourism, also within environmental limits. So my policy and for the Green Party Manifesto, we're looking at more food production, more space for nature, more environmental protection, more opportunities for farmers, huge investments in rural skills as a priority as well, but a big push for diversity in food. Finally, really have to say, we need to represent the people of Wales in our food system. We're too white, we're too male, we're too stale, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's nothing to feel guilty about. It's where we are, but we really need to try much harder to provide for the people of Wales.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Janet, I know you want to come back on the funding issue, but over to you, Janet, to set up your vision for 2 or 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, and it's such a pleasure to be with you. And you know, in the time I've held this portfolio, it's fair to say that we've had really positive workings with the CLA. Now, I suppose tonight your question really is about your, what you want to see in, manifestos, and what you want to see whichever government that's elected going forward do. Now, I have to say, in the short time I've held this portfolio, I've actually been quite shocked at the lack of focus on our farmers, the lack of focus on our landowners. And, when you consider the amount of land that is owned, and that is farmed, 88% of our land in Wales is farmed. And we talk about sustainable food production, we talk about sustainability generally. Well, I've got to be honest, I believe that come May the 6th, our farmers who are feeling very betrayed at the moment and very let down with some of the things brought forward from the Welsh Labour government, I think that, you know, there may well be a chance that they see that the Welsh Conservatives not only support farmers, but, you know, will be bringing through quite a few things. I mean, for instance, you know, a lot of in Aberconway constituency that I've represented for 10 years, I have a lot of, you know, sort of farmers, and I'm in touch with them on a very regular basis. And, you know, we only have to look at broadband infrastructure that, you know, a lot of money came through from the UK government to put in place, you know, sustainable broadband, because, you know, a lot of farmers now are having to do everything and more online. And it's fair to say the Welsh government has failed us in that regard. I uphold your values as well about profitability and sustainability. I think the Brexit, now that we're out of Brexit, you know, with all the trade deals that are being done, this is a time to embrace positivity as opposed to the negativity that I've seen in the Senedd from the Welsh Labour government, you know, in terms of talking down and still wanting to fight the argument about Brexit instead of getting on and supporting our farmers. Diversification is big on our agenda. You know, too often I've seen my own farmers come forward with an idea to help support them to keep, you know, it could be a 5th generation farm and they want to go into diversification. And I have to tell you, the hoops and the barriers placed before them are just, well, they're incomprehensible. You cannot say any government can support the diversification of farmers to have such an overburdensome planning in place. Now, protecting our fresh water is exactly a key element of what the Welsh Conservatives believe, but that does not mean putting that huge burden of responsibility onto our Welsh farmers. You know, the nitrate vulnerable zones, for instance, were brought in to zone off areas that are problematic, but this all Wales, you know, sort of implementation of these measures now will actually and could actually push many of our farmers over the brink. You know, we've got some really good proposals. Our manifesto is being launched next week. But just quickly, really, some of the things that we would do, there've been many flooding issues affecting our farmers. So we would be establishing a national flood agency to coordinate flood risk. We'd be facilitating independent inquiries into flood crisis events, designing blue belts in areas of flood risk. There's a lot of animal welfare issues now, and our farmers are almost targeted on animal welfare issues. We believe that CCTV should be compulsory in Welsh slaughterhouses. We've been calling on the Welsh Labour government to bring that in, but I think I am better answering your questions, you know, direct questions from your viewers, and then we can show really what the Welsh Conservatives are about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Janet. And moving quickly on, Jane, would you like to set out your vision for a couple of minutes, please?
Sure, and I won't be long. Diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyfle I siarad â chi heno. Lovely bod efo chi. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So nice being with you here this evening. Just 3 things to look at that the Welsh Liberal Democrats are focusing on. We're saying we want to put recovery first. That's about economic recovery, that's about mental health recovery, and that's about our climate recovery. So just looking at economic recovery, here in a rural area, and Emily and I both, I think, live in the most least densely populated constituency in the whole of England and Wales. We live in Brecon and Radnorshire. And right here, we see directly the issues that are faced by rural communities. And what we need to see, 3 things really quickly in terms of our farmers. We need to see a smooth transition from the old scheme to the new scheme. We want to see sustainable succession planning for our farmers to make sure that young people have the opportunity to get into farming and they're supported in that. And we want to make sure that we have our high animal standards and our high welfare standards protected when it comes to Welsh farming. That's part of our economic recovery. That's about the focus that we have there. We want to make sure that for Wales, we have the first ever economic development plan that actually has a laser sharp focus on how Wales can actually develop economically. And part of that is having a rural development task force, which actually focuses on the issues in our rural areas. Our mental health. There have been significant issues around COVID, and in rural areas, they're particularly felt. Loneliness and the effects of COVID and being on your own has exacerbated the feeling that many farmers and landowners will have, which is that the rural services do not meet their needs. We need to focus in on mental health. And finally, we're looking at our recovery around our planet. And we want to make sure that we support our farmers and landowners, that we work closely with them to understand the challenges around how we can decrease our greenhouse gases and ensure that we increase our commitment to the environment. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr, Jane. Last but certainly not least, Llyr, if you could set out your vision, and then we're going to go quickly on to the questions.
Okay, well, thank you, Nigel. Thank you for the welcome. I mean, Wales's rural communities are integral, of course, to our identity as a nation, and Plaid Cymru is committed to creating sustainable rural communities. Now, I know that's bandied around very often, but for me, what that means is communities where people can live, communities where people can work, and communities where people can enjoy access to the services that they need. Now, unfortunately, the current government has ignored the voice of rural Wales for too long. Its consultations on future farm support to sustainable farming on our land and the recent MVZ regulations, of course, has highlighted to me that Labour just isn't listening to rural Wales. Now, that would change under a Plaid Cymru government. Plaid Cymru would put rural Wales at the heart of government policy. We'll, I'm sure, expand on the proposed agriculture bill for Wales later on, but we would recognise, in that in order for farms to be environmentally sustainable, they have to be economically sustainable. And that's why, unlike the other parties, our cap replacement scheme would include a baseline support payment to farmers, offering the industry the greater economic stability they need at this challenging time. Yes, move towards the payment for public goods agenda. I support that wholeheartedly, but I'd rather a hybrid scheme where you do have that element of security and stability through a form of baseline payments. We would annul the NVZ regulations and we'd replace it with a proportionate and more targeted approach. And of course, if we want to retain young people in rural communities, then they have to be living, breathing communities with decent jobs and homes. And on jobs, our green economic plan will create 60,000 jobs for Wales, many of which would be in environmental sectors and land management sector as well. Our procurement pledge that all public procurement in Wales should prioritise Welsh food produce will help significantly grow our domestic market, supporting new processing capacity as a result, of course, and helping to retain that added value and jobs in our rural communities. We have a target to be planting 100,000 hectares of new woodland every decade. We want to bring ultra-fast gigabit broadband to all Welsh homes and all businesses by 2026, so that's in 5 years' time. We have proposals for 50,000 new social homes, including 15,000 affordable homes, which would obviously help in a rural context as well. I don't want our rural communities to be left behind. And as somebody who's lived in and raised my 4 children in a rural community, that is how it feels quite often. So we have a clear choice when the election comes on the 6th of May. We can stumble along as we have done for many years under a Labour government where a third of our children are living in poverty and where rural communities feel neglected, or we can choose a new path. And if I can promise you anything this evening, and I'm sure we'll get on to detail about other things, but if I can promise you anything tonight, it's that a vote for Plaid Cymru is a vote for a new government that will genuinely put the interests of our rural communities at the heart of its work.
Thank you, everybody, for that. So I'm going to move quickly on to the questions. I think it's fair to say that the questions represent many of the issues that we're interested in the CLA, but they do come directly from members. So I'm going to give the members the chance to have their say. If you could try and make your answers fairly short and succinct, that would be great. Please don't feel that you need to answer all the questions. I'll make sure there's enough time for everybody to have said something on all of them. But if I can move on to the first question from Rory McLagan, who's the chair of CLA Cymru. The question's there in the box, but I'm going to read it out very briefly. How would your policies ensure that the rural sector in Wales delivers substantive and lasting environmental and biodiversity improvements, a significant contribution to climate change mitigation, and importantly, a continuing supply of high quality food? Who would like to answer that as briefly as you can, please? Who'd like to kick off for that particular one? I've got Lly's hand first. Thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to come in on that. I mean, more generally, we will be committing, or we have committed in our manifesto, to reaching net zero carbon by 2035, not 2050, which is the current government target. And we are proposing a Nature Act, which would set statutory targets for the recovery of habitats and biodiversity in Wales, to stop the decline by 2030 and hopefully to get them back to where they need to be by 2050. So that's a general sort of aspiration in terms of where we can get to, but I honestly believe that the proposed Wales Agriculture Bill is key in this respect. And I think the question was hinting at striking this balance between achieving the environmental outcomes we want to achieve, but also protecting a safe, secure source of food for us.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, that's where our hybrid proposal comes in that we do move, make a significant shift in terms of moving towards payment for public goods, and those would include the environmental goods that we all want to see, amongst others. But we would retain that baseline payment. Wouldn't be the same as the BPS, but it would, effectively give our farmers that security so that they can plan for the future. You need that security so that you can actually plan your business and invest in infrastructure to make sure that we can retain that food produce that we want to see.
Okay, who'd like to come next onto that particular point? Janet.
Thank you. Well, of course, it's fair to say our landowners and our farmers already, we have some of the highest animal welfare standards, the highest quality foods, but we also have some of the highest, solutions to the climate change agenda provided to us by our farmers and by our landowners. And, Welsh Government should be actually working more positively with our farmers rather than against them. But, we would be working to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 or before. 10 years I've been a member of the Senedd, we have not, despite, lots of sounds about climate change, climate emergency, there's been no legislation, there's been no funding put forward or on side to bring in any measures to do that. And so we'd support the aspiration to reach net zero agriculture emissions by 2040. We'd convene an emergency green economic summit. We would, it's not all down to the farmers in climate change, so we would encourage a variety of cutting-edge renewable energy technologies, including nuclear, marine energy and tidal energy. We would invest up to 50 million in completing a fast charging network and providing more funding for electric public transport vehicles. We would work with universities and the private sector to create a new centre for excellence and energy and transportation. Hydropower is a thing that I've worked with a lot of landowners and farmers on, and yet just as a lot of them have converted and diversified into hydropower, they've had the rug pulled from under them by having the rate relief grants whipped away. So we're going to see less farmers wanting to invest in that. Those private hydropower schemes.
Janet, sorry to interrupt. Quickly, if you can, please. I'm conscious we've got loads of questions coming in.
Yeah, that's just some of the things we do.
Fantastic, thank you. Would anybody else like to come back on that? I think Emily.
Shall I just come back quickly?
Hey, thanks again. Can quickly, please.
First of all, just to say, I think that the contribution of the CLA to the white paper and to the developments of that have been really constructive and really, really helpful in helping the Welsh Government shape the kind of proposals that we have now, because there's a real understanding within the CLA of the importance of getting this right, because the people who are on the front line, if we get this climate change issue wrong, are you who are landowners, and so we have to make sure that we keep that at that front of our thoughts. We've got a net zero proposal by 2050, and that's based on science, it's based on evidence. The Plaid Cymru have said that they want to cut it by 2035. That's really quick, and there's no question if it goes that quickly, we will have to reduce significantly the size of the agricultural community, because we simply can't do it and get to net zero at that pace. The other thing that I'm really concerned about is biodiversity. The rate at which we are losing species, which we will never get back, is incredible. And that's why paying agricultural workers, paying landowners, paying the agricultural community to make sure that they can support nature for the long term is exactly where we should be. And that's what's in the white paper.
Emily, I'm going to bring you in just very quickly because you did have your hand up, and then Llyr, I know you want to come back on climate change. Just really brief if you can, because the questions are flooding in.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, firstly, I had a whole host of things I want to say. Firstly, the MVZ regulations are there to protect water, but they are also going to have a huge impact on climate change. And whilst I think they have been put together in a way that is really unhelpful and they won't deliver the changes that we want them to see, they will cut carbon. So what I would like to do is I don't want to do what the Conservatives and what Plaid Cymru want to do and just get rid of them straight away, but I do want to use the powers to amend them as a high priority and amend them in close consultation with farmers to make them sensible, but to also the climate benefits that we would have. But can I just make the point again that what the Green Party want to do is we want to front load funding because we need to regenerate soils. We need to capture carbon in soils. Regenerating soils takes time and we need to plant trees. I want to shout out to the Hedges and Edges. The Woodland Trust Quig Cadw are doing a lot of promoting at this moment. It's
briefly, Emily, thanks.
It's a priority. We need to front load funding and we need to make sure that farmers are paid because we need to get real about this. Farmers aren't going to work all day, every day for nothing or even just for costs incurred. Nobody would do that. I wouldn't do it. No one would do it. So we need to make sure that they are paid a fair amount of money. And that is about valuing nature, valuing climate, and valuing goods.
So Llyr, coming in the point that's been made already about funding and about food, I know you've got a strong position on that. Do you want to share us that briefly, please, in terms of the question?
Nigel, can I respond as well when that's over?
Yes, of course, yeah. I think Lly's frozen. Do you want to come in now, Jane?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise you were addressing me, Nigel. Sorry,
Llyr, I know you wanted to come back on that. I think you're next and then Jane.
Well, yeah, the point I wanted to make
briefly, please.
In response to Eluned, yes, it's ambitious, 2035 net zero carbon, but don't forget the agriculture sector itself is committed to being net zero by 2040. So why the government is clinging on to this 2050 figure, I have no idea. It lacks ambition.
Jane?
Yeah, just really quickly, really great question. Thank you very much. So just looking at what the rural powerhouse is all about, that is what the CLA have been promoting. This is exactly why we need this rural powerhouse in order to respond to some of the issues that are raised in the question. In terms of farming and in terms of high quality food, we need to do more to make sure that the farm to fork process is much shorter, that we keep our food in our communities. And my goodness, haven't we seen that in COVID? Haven't we seen the fact that our local farms, our local businesses are actually able to deliver the food that we want and we're shopping more local? Let's keep that going. And I think the third thing I just want to say really quickly is what we want as in the Welsh Liberal Democrats. We want a centre of excellence. That is a centre of excellence that's looking at developing the technologies and the skills that we need in order to develop renewable energy and to work in a rural area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to move quickly on to our second and third questions. We've got 23 to answer, so let's see how far we can get through. The second and third questions I'm going to group together. One from Angharad Owen, who's our North Wales chair, about tourism. Janet, I know, and indeed for all of you, tourism is extremely important. And then linking in with the question from Andrew Richards about some authorities raising council tax on second homes. How do you kind of balance that absolute need to provide tourism opportunities for our members and everybody else in Wales, balancing the need with affordable housing and some of the issues that you might get with second homes? Who'd like to come back quickly on that one? Jane, I think you were first, and then Janet.
Thank you. Just really quickly then, I'm really pleased to see that the changes around the permitted rights of development have moved from 28 days to 56 days. That's allowing landowners and farmers to be able to use their land now for tourism for up to 56 days. That's really encouraging. Let's see if we can develop that and let's see if we can take that into the future. That's really going to help our tourism here in our rural areas. Critically, we need to make sure in terms of second homes that we really do work together on this one, because I'm from Welsh speaking community. I know that there are there can be some real tensions here between in communities, and we need to be working together, and that means working across parties. Let's not get at each other all the time. Let's try and work together here to actually make sure that our rural communities thrive in terms of tourism. And finally, in terms of the council tax and the ability of the local authority to vary it, I actually think we need something across Wales which actually says this is a uniform approach, because it is a bit of madness that we have Ceredigion giving 100% council tax and somewhere else like Wrexham, where I was born and brought up, giving even more, asking even more. So let's have a conversation here which is about us working together and focusing in on the rural communities.
Janet, tourism, second homes.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, both coastal tourism and rural tourism have been devastated by the COVID. And that is a time when governments are there to support those businesses. And I frankly have been appalled at, you know, the amount of money that's been held back with Welsh Labour government that has come from Rishi Sunak, that has come from the Welsh government to help with business continuity, that has simply been held back in the coffers of the Welsh government and not handed out to those businesses that are desperate for it. What is wrong with tourism? Well, certainly for me in Aberconway, it's one of our biggest industries, apart from the public sector, that is. It's one of our biggest industries. And, you know, I am not in favour of council tax premiums for people with second homes. At the end of the day, when people come into Wales from England, they spend their money here, they provide jobs locally here. And I have been very, very shocked by some local authorities whereby there's almost been an anti-English visitor rhetoric during COVID. And I think the Welsh government needs to, well, should have stepped in and actually, you know, protect our tourism industry and our rural communities. At the end of the day, farmers have to diversify, and there's some fantastic diversifications now with glamping pods, and you know, the planning system, as I say, is, you know, it might, whilst, you know, it's been eased in some respects, it's still overburdensome. And I just say that, you know, obviously you've got to balance that. There is a problem in Wales because they simply haven't been building houses in the 22 years that they've been in government, and they've been backed up by Plaid Cymru. So that, you know, the deficit of housing stock that we have now, where we cannot provide affordable homes, should not then be blamed on people who have a second home or a holiday let. I think the whole pendulum on this needs swinging back to a fine balance.
Eluned, we're £137 billion worse off, according to you, for the Conservative government. Where does that fit with the lack of funding maybe for that should be coming out from for council tax from local authorities, and the links to the tourism debate? Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Welsh government has stepped in and has given far more support to businesses during COVID than they've given in England. So I really don't know what on earth Janet Saunders is talking about. Tourism is fundamental to the economy of Wales. It contributes about 12% to our economy. It's very significant, tens of thousands of jobs associated with it. And certainly something that we will need to see bounce back very quickly after the pandemic. And I'm very confident that that is likely to happen. And I'm really pleased that we've managed to stand by them during this difficult time. But in terms of second homes, I think it's a really difficult and sensitive issue. It's a very, very complex issue. Partly because what is a second home? There's lots of different definitions of second homes. You know, if you perhaps we want somebody who's a specialist doctor to come and work in our rural areas during the week, but they may want to go back to their family in a city. Now, I wouldn't want to penalise people like that because we need their support. But I do think that we want to see fewer houses empty for most of the year. And so we need to differentiate between them. And that's why we'll be bringing in new measures just to make that much clearer. We've also increased the land transaction tax for second homes, and I think that's fair enough. But the key thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that you should want your children, if possible, to be able to stay in rural areas or to come home to rural areas. And at the moment, that is extremely difficult, especially if you live in a national park. We've built 20,000 affordable homes during this Senedd, and we've promised to build 25,000 more. The key thing for me, though, is that we've just got to get more quality jobs in rural areas. That's how we're going to address some of these issues.
Lee, can I bring you in on the funding issue? See, I know that your party, you're looking to have a vote on independence in Wales. How does that fit with what money we might want from Westminster and that whole debate about we want more money in Wales, but where's that money going to come from? I mean, there's a question there about weddings, how they're important. We've heard about how tourism is important to the Welsh communities. How do we balance all that stuff together? And what would be your ask from on the more money debate?
Well, we do it in the same way as every other country in the world does it. You know, what is there inherently different in us in Wales to every other independent nation in the world? You know, I mean, other countries have started from a poorer point than us. And the question we should be asking ourselves is, why are we suffering a status quo that's left us in this position? You know, that's the question we should be asking ourselves. I mean, we're rich in natural resources, for example. We generate twice as much energy as we use in Wales. You know, we're one of the biggest net exporters of electricity in the world. We have water, we're water rich, we're food rich. Janet said 80% of Welsh land mass is there for generating food. You know, food, energy, water, that's the currency of the future. Wars are being fought around this world based on those assets, and we have them in abundance. There's nothing inherently wrong with us in Wales that we can't stand on our own 2 feet. And frankly, your question points to me or emphasizes to me the fact that the status quo has put us where we are.
So in terms of the whole investment debate, and Emily, I will come back to you in a second. We've got a number of questions there. One is focused on what would your parties do for the wedding sector? What will we do to encourage more tourism? We've got a point there about innovation and skills, about how we should invest in that. I mean, do you think you've all set out a very strong plan for what a post-COVID route map will look like? I mean, what would your parties do to support some of those this year, you know, straight away? I think the questions that we've got there. Who would like to come back on that one?
I'll start. So
Yeah.
post-COVID, we need to be looking at the economy, need to be looking at mental health, and we need to be making sure that we look at our climate recovery. There are some specific issues there around tourism, around weddings. We need to absolutely invest in our rural economy to make sure that we really sell ourselves. And I want to look at a brand Wales, a proper brand Wales that says that this is what we can do. This is what we can offer. We've got a brilliant opportunity now, an opportunity which gives us the option of really moving forward here in Wales and making sure that we really sell our rural areas and market them properly. So, you know, an example really is how we can get our skills updated, how we can keep our young people here. And to do that, we do need to invest more in education, more in our technologies, and making sure that we really do focus in on our young people. We need to listen to them. This year, for the first time, 16 and 17-year-olds are voting in the Senedd. And we need to make sure that we listen to what they say about why they want to stay in the rural areas.
On the point there from Ewan about how would each of your parties coordinate with Westminster? We touched a little bit about the funding issue, but many of our members have repeatedly said to us, it seems crazy having one set of rules for Wales and another set of rules for England, particularly if you're on the border and you're 2 miles away from England or the other way round. It's been quite challenging for many of them. Would anybody like to just come back and I'll try and answer some of that question about, maybe you, Janet, about joining up with Westminster on the COVID support that's been offered and everything else? Janet?
Well, yeah, if you go back to the time when we were all very unsure of how COVID would affect us, you know, we all had the Nightingale hospitals and everything. We had a pledge on the table. Correspondence was sent to the Welsh government offering beds in England, you know, because at the end of the day, let me put on record, I'm totally opposed to independence. And, you know, it's fair to say the majority of you here in Aberconway, from people I speak to, they have actually been left so frustrated during a 12-month pandemic, public health emergency, with powers that were vested with the Welsh government. And, you know, the UK government trusted the Welsh government with those powers, only to find that every time the Prime Minister made a decision, the First Minister just decided to go in a different decision. It's absolutely bonkers that right now you can go out and have a drink in a pub in England, and here, you know, my local rural pubs and everything are facing potential closure because of the dreadful approach taken by this Welsh government. You know, it should be all for one and one for all in times of national emergency. And frankly, the arguments still about Brexit, even during a COVID pandemic, have frightened me as a result of Mark Drakeford's handling of this. And I just think, you know, going forward, I would like to see that there's more mature discussion takes place between the, you know, the first ministers of the different, you know, and the Prime Minister and
Sure.
the UK government and Welsh.
Use your hand up there. If Wales was independent, how would you join up with London? But that's a different discussion.
Well, I mean, again, in the same way as every other country in the world works with its colleagues and other countries across its borders. You know, it's not unique. It's not a quirk for us in Wales. It's the reality on a global level. I mean, crikey. I mean, what I would say in response to Janet, I mean, there's no reason, you know, to do things differently for the sake of doing anything differently. I mean, I'd never support that. You know, that's crazy. But I am grateful, for example, that we didn't follow the English example on the test and trace system, which cost them billions and billions of pounds and was an unmitigated disaster. And they're now reverting to a system that was adopted in Wales a long, long time ago. You know, the UK has some of the highest mortality rates globally from COVID. So I'm not sure that's anything to be proud of. And you know, if pubs in Wales were open and pubs in England were still closed, would Janet be demanding that pubs in Wales close then? You know, I mean, it's obscure to insist that we have to do everything the same. You do what you need to do within your local context. If that means doing the same as other people, that's fine. But if it means doing something different, then at least we should have.
Where's the science? Where's the science? We've not seen any science on the MVZ or science on the keeping businesses closed.
Well, where have been
give us the science.
We've been given the science week in, week out by the Welsh government in the same way as the UK government has been interpreting its science. You know, I mean,
we've got a question on science, which I'll come back to in a sec. Eluned, I know you wanted to come back on something there from Welsh government perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Just first of all, in terms of tourism, I think the issue in Wales with tourism is that, you know, during peak periods, you know, it's about sustainable tourism. The challenge for us is how do we extend the season so that we can make sure that we can use our tourism sector over a longer period of time. So I think that that COVID will make a difference. Frankly, I think that we'll see a lot more staycations, and I think that will ultimately, you know, we'll see a lot more people holidaying in Wales. And one of the things we have to look at is skills. You know, what are the skills that we need to focus on? And we need to be asking employers, what is it that we don't have in those rural communities, and making sure that the colleges are actually offering courses for people for jobs that are needed. Just to address the issue, just to address the issue in relation to Westminster, let me tell you, Janet, we are following the science. It is the UK government that is not following the science in relation to COVID. The scientists told us categorically, do not send all your children back at the same time. Send them back in waves and make sure you check how things are going. Don't open everything at the same time. This is what the scientists and the experts are telling us, and that's what we've been doing. Following advice, not following the masses and the voices of screams that are coming from all different sectors of society.
What about mental health pandemic? What about the mental health pandemic?
Our job in government is to keep people safe, and I can tell you, mental health issues will get worse if we have to open, close, open, close, open, close. We are going to open slowly, cautiously, because that is the way that we're going to keep people safe and make sure that actually we don't get into that situation, which will be much worse for people's mental health. And let me just say, in relation to protective equipment, PPE, you know, the way that they procured that from the UK government point of view is a disaster. They came to us and asked us for PPE, and also in relation to test, track and trace, 38 billion they've wasted in the UK, in England on test, track and trace. What we have in Wales is the best of both worlds. The vaccines, the cooperation on that has been brilliant. We've got the best of both worlds. We can adapt locally where we need to, but at one point, where we can, let's work with them. We're not averse to working with them. It's just when we think they're going the wrong way, we're not going to follow them.
Emily, I know you wanted to come in. I wonder, I'm conscious of time, whether, Emily, you might want to pick up the point about NVZ. Has been a major issue for us about pollution, about whole wide Wales approach. Where's the science behind it? And on the back of that, how on earth do we measure zero carbon farming? A question from Ian Hill-Trevor, our vice chair. In the pursuit of net zero carbon farming, how can we assess land use? How do we bring all the science together to measure things, to do things properly? And how can we do it unless we've got an effective tool? I'm going to stop on COVID because I think we'll be here all night otherwise. Emily.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nigel. And I wanted very briefly, because I was dying to come back on this tourism and the second home tax thing.
If you can quickly, please.
So there's a big difference between a second home and a holiday home. Holiday homes bring visitors in all around the year. Second homes might have somebody there for a few weeks a year. And I'm sorry, but that incredible doctor can rent. They don't have to buy a home. They don't have to do that. They can rent a home. So we don't need second homes. I don't really know hardly anyone that could afford a second home. So why should we make that possible? But importantly, what we need to do is build homes. Why haven't we been building homes? We need to build a lot more.
20,000.
We need to build more homes. They need to be incredibly high environmental standard. But I'm not going to go on to that, on and on and on. And we need other diversification options. Tourism is not the only option, Janet. But we need, and for that we need connectivity. But on NVZ and on science, so absolutely we have to be led by the science. We already have the science. The science is there. We just need to use it. And that is the frustration of people with these NVZs and the water pollution. Even NRW have the science, but they are not using it. They're not coming out. They are not doing the monitoring that they need to do. Why in COVID, why in lockdown did we stop people coming out and monitoring the environment, monitoring ecosystems? That was the worst mistake for me, for our future and for nature. Why did Welsh Government say that we cannot, that NRW have to stop going out and monitoring on their own? That was critical time, and it was a really sad missed opportunity. But we have the science, we just need to put the money behind it, and we need to pay, we need to give the resources to NRW for monitoring, for enforcement, and for that
and maybe
comprehensive package. And then we need to give it to talk to farmers about it and say, you have to do this. I'm sorry, we have to do this. It's for everybody's benefit. We have to reduce these levels. We need to do that now, and we need your input on how we can do that best.
Jane, maybe bringing you on this whole wide Wales approach. NVZ is a massive issue for all of our farmers. Our position is that we think it should be more targeted. Emily makes the point about we should just do it and get on with it, but obviously there's a financial implication there. Maybe where are you on science, NVZ, and a Wales-wide approach to anything? Do we split Wales up and do things on local authority basis, or do we just operate across Wales?
So what we did see with the introduction of the NVZ was an all Wales approach, and I don't think that's helpful. What we're hearing from farmers are that there are different issues in different areas, and we must acknowledge that. I have to say the other thing as well is that it was introduced at a time where we've got farmers struggling with COVID issues. And it absolutely has to be looked at. Water pollution really is important, but to look at introducing a whole Wales-wide issue right now for farmers when it's COVID. Can I just stop? Can I just finish, please, Janet? I haven't interrupted you, and you are interrupting quite a few of us. So please, can we be allowed to finish our sentences? Thank you. The NVZ issue is really important, and we need to be listening to farmers. It is unfortunate that on 11 occasions, the Labour government did say they weren't going to introduce it, and then they did. So we feel that of course, we have to look at it, but right now is not time, and absolutely not to have an all Wales approach. We have to have something that's about the regions and the areas in Wales where we know that our farmers know the land the best. Thank you.
The Lib Dems didn't vote against it.
No, I was going to say.
I'm very happy to come back to that. I think you'll find if you're referring to Kirsty Williams, the Liberal Democrat Education Minister, she didn't vote. She told the Cabinet that she was not going to support it. And I think if you look back and look at how many times in a Cabinet has a Cabinet member told the Cabinet they're not going to support it. I don't think you'll find it. I don't think you'll find it on any occasion. Kirsty has done that on the NVZs. She's also done that on Brexit. Thank you.
Llyr, where are you on the Wales-wide approach? I know you want to come in, Llyr.
Yeah, diametrically opposed to the Wales-wide approach. Natural Resources Wales recommended 80% coverage of Wales. That's the science. They're the statutory advisor to Welsh Government. Government ignored it, went for 100%, so they're not listening to the science. Now, that's not to say that there is an issue that needs to be tackled, but the whole farming by calendar approach that this entrenches doesn't make sense. You know, big environmentalists like Tony Juniper, chair of Natural England, have said it's sort of environmentally illiterate to go on calendar dates for spreading slurry, for example. And I noted actually last week, I was reading an article where England are now looking to move away from farming by calendar and to introduce a risk matrix where you have this sort of real-time approach, utilising weather data, weather technology, GPS technology, so that farmers actually receive potentially a text from the Environment Agency in England every morning, advising them as to whether it's appropriate or not that they spread slurry. You know, that's the kind of more sophisticated approach, and not this sort of 30-year-old regulation that the Welsh Government has just cut and pasted into regulation in Wales.
Thanks, Llyr. I think we've covered the Wales-wide approach at MBZ. We've got about 10 minutes left. So there's a question from Lloyd James about renewable energy, taxation for renewable energy. All of the parties are utterly committed to addressing climate change, increasing renewable energy, etc., etc. But the question is about, can we not just do more around help supporting that particular industry? Who would like to come back on that particular issue? And I'd like to focus, if I can, on actually delivering climate change. Big targets are great, but how will we actually get on and do things on the ground? And then, if I can say, many of our members, based on the planning report we did, that it's actually very difficult to get lots of different things done because of planning restrictions. So how can we improve delivery to pick up on the big targets that are out there?
Well, I think certainly as somebody who used to work in the renewables sector and tried to build a wind farm, I can tell you it is difficult, and it certainly was difficult when I was working in the sector. And that's partly because it is a complicated situation, because one of the things we have to consider is grid. And we've got to make sure that the grid is strong enough to support renewable energy. And certainly in Mid Wales, that there's a question around that. And I do think that people need to understand now that actually, as we move towards electric cars, for example, we're going to have to make sure that we renew and reinforce that grid to make sure that people in future will actually be able to move around. So whilst there was a real move against developing renewables in some parts of Wales because they didn't like pylons and things, I would like to think that situation may change now that, frankly, in a few years' time, they simply won't be able to get around. So I do think we need to understand the connection and the complication. It's not just about renewables, it's about producing the energy, it's connecting the energy with the communities that need it. We've already got to 50% production of electricity through renewables in Wales. I think we can go much further. I would like to see a lot more offshore wind farms, for example. I think there's potential around marine energy. We put a huge amount of money into this, and I would like to see all of that come to fruition in the next few years.
And before I bring in the next speaker, there's a question from Mark Tuffin, our Deputy President. Can central government, whether that's UK or Welsh government, do more to support or almost force local planning authorities to speed up opportunities for this kind of delivery? Who'd like to come back on the delivery side, which I think many of our members...
Yeah, I would like to turn to Mark, because I'm in St David's at the moment, Mark. So I know it's a part of the world he loves. Certainly, I think we need to get all of the different arms of government working better together. So I do think that there is more work to be done to work with NRW to make that connection, make that process much, much quicker.
And just quickly on the back of delivery, we're woefully behind our tree planting targets, aren't we, at the moment? So again, how do we get more delivery? Who'd like to come back on this point?
So we have very ambitious targets, as I mentioned in my opening comments, and part of the £6 billion green economic stimulus that we are proposing for Wales includes, investment in forestry. We really need to ramp it up because the targets that the government set in the past, have been woefully missed. So we really need to ramp that up. But I just want to pick up on energy, if I may. you know, it's not as if Labour have had 20 years to sort some of this out. Natural Resources Wales are, I think, a third down on their funding compared to where they were when they were set up. So, you know, to say that NRW needs to do more is a bit rich when you're taking the money away from them as well. Now, we're committed to an energy atlas for Wales. That would mean mapping out the whole of Wales to identify where the renewable energy potential is. We also want to set up a CLA Cymru, Energy Wales, which would be an energy development company working with communities, with third sector, with local authorities, public sector and private sector to start, try and realise some of that potential. Of course, you know, you mentioned Marine. We have some of the biggest tidal drops in the world off the Welsh coast, and we're not harnessing any of it. So schemes like Model ISA are excellent. The final point I'd make around renewable energy, of course, is that this government has taken away the rate relief on hydro, commercial hydro plants in Wales, which has hit a lot of farming and sort of you know, other schemes, and that's regrettable. They tell us they have these laudable aspirations, and then they pull the rug under the feet of the sector.
Emily, what would the Green Party do to encourage better delivery? Just very quickly, please. More trees, more renewable energy. We need all of it, but where would you get the money from to do that?
Well, we have in our manifesto that we would set up a transformation fund for Wales, or a green transformation fund for Wales. So this would be a new, to be honest, this is not my strong area, and this is my first series of hustings. So I'm taking from a briefing on this. Our Green Transformation Fund will finance ambitious decarbonisation. So this would meet the scale and urgency. So it's advocating a carbon tax and investing in carbon reducing infrastructure. This is not my strong point with coming from the funding. I know you're going to have to look at my manifesto.
Emily, that's fine. We've got plenty of other things to discuss.
To respond on the planning side of things, as sitting on a planning committee, I do see the real life issues that we have with encouraging development. I'm afraid I have to actually say that I'm quite impressed with what the Labour government have done with planning. Planning policy Wales has actually made significant improvements, and let's get real, it's a really complicated, but of course I'd like to improve on that. And what I would really like to do is get much more community involvement, because I'm really passionate about community energy schemes. So I would like to make that more possible.
Thank you. There's a point that's been made by Ian Hill, Trevor, about we need to join up on the borders. Many of our businesses are based on the borders, so linking England and Wales is critically important. But can I just pick up on one question from Barbara Warren? If I could ask maybe some of you to come back on the point about the potential M4 devastating the precious Gwent levels. What we haven't spoken about is access and transport. Access is really important to CLA members. Many of our members have footpaths going through their farms. If you put a road in, that clearly is a very different issue to localised access. But what are your thoughts about improving the transport infrastructure, the fact that we're likely to have enormous numbers of people coming into the countryside, which we welcome, obviously, but there's problems associated with that. Would anybody like to pick up on access more generally and what we should be doing to make sure it's as successful as it should be? Jane?
Yeah, no, sure, I'll go. Well, I think the first thing is that we need to be thinking about our public transport system. We need to be looking at how we can invest in that more. We also need to be making sure that we are again working together. And, you know, I think that's it across the political parties here as well this evening. There's some really good ideas and some really good points, and everybody, you know, doesn't own this. We need to be working together here to make sure that we have a much better response to you who are watching this, because it's never great when you're seeing parties getting at each other. Let's try and work together on this. Let's look at how we can invest in public transport. Let's look at, you know, whether we do need new roads. You know, I'm still concerned about the idea that the M4 extension may still be built. That really worries me. The money going into South Wales, really, we need to be looking at that being distributed across the whole of Wales to look at all of the transport needs here. And again, to go back to Eluned's points, and I totally agree with what Eluned said about electric charging points. You know, living right in the middle of Mid Wales, and I live right on the border. I live in Hay-on-Wye, right on the border here. And we do need a better grid system, absolutely. And we need to invest in that, not just for individuals, but for our businesses, because that's how we're going to be attracting businesses here. So let's all work together and let's make sure that we pull together some of the brilliant ideas that there are from all of the people here this evening.
Thank you for that. That point about working together, I think everybody would probably agree with. I mean, what do we do then if we are going to do that? I mean, what are the most key, important, critical issues that we want to try and address? We've got lots of questions that we're sadly going to run out of time on, but Ross Murray makes a good point about, you know, what would you do for the rural private sector? What would we do for this, the fact that you know, we need more homes, that we need to support that particular part of the sector? How do we join this all up to make this a reality going forward? Anybody else like to come back on joining things up?
Well, I do think partnership is important, and the key thing, as far as I'm concerned, certainly when I was developing the rural economy plan for Wales that I developed as a backbench assembly member, it was all about partnership, making sure that I listened to the concerns of in particular, the private sector. I think it's really important that we understand that wealth is created in the private sector. And by God, we need some more wealth in this country. So I do think that this is where this connection comes in. What is it that the private sector are looking for in terms of skills, for example, where the public sector can actually start to drive those skills, make sure that they're being taught the right things in our schools and colleges. We've got an entire reform of our educational curriculum to make sure that people are prepared for the new world, which is very, very different from the world that certainly I was brought up with.
Sure.
One of the frustrations I have is that the voice of rural Wales isn't really being heard as it should, and really isn't penetrating into government decisions. One of the things that we're proposing is to create a rural parliament. Now, it's not going to be an elected parliament, but it's a forum, it's a citizens' assembly model, if you like, where we bring all the stakeholders and participants together so that they can actually present the views, the collective views of rural Wales directly to government, and hopefully have a greater influence on the decisions that affect their lives.
Well, I'd go
in on that.
Yeah, Janet, quickly.
Sorry, I think you said Emily. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, Janet, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a question on the chat about how do you monitor, how do you work with science and everything. Well, we would look at making the Rural Development Advisory Board statutory. We don't need to keep setting up other boards and things, but the one that we do have, we should be making it statutory. Labour, the Welsh Labour government, will not do this. And we would involve our key stakeholders like the NFU, the Farmers Union of Wales, the Country Land and Business Association, CLA, you know, as has been made, the points have been made here tonight. If you've got science, you should be working with that science. The science is ignored on the MVZs. And it is being ignored, actually, to do with COVID, but it's also being ignored about climate change. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, the Welsh Labour government, you know, talking of climate change and what they've done, they've actually missed their target of planting 2,000 hectares of trees a year. So where you look at the support our farmers and landowners need, it's fail, 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 fail. 22 years of Labour, propped up by Plaid Cymru, the odd Lib Dems. It's time for the Welsh Conservatives on May the 6th. Give us a chance, and in 5 years' time, let's see how we can help our environment, but certainly help our landowners and farmers.
If I can just bring Emily in very quickly, and then what I'd like to do is give every one of the candidates 20 seconds to say one thing to our members, please, before we close. Emily, quickly.
I'm coming back first, right? Briefly.
Yes, please. Yeah.
So yeah, we also have in our manifesto that we would have a citizens' assembly, but it would be a food and farming assembly, and that's I actually, you know, I think there's a lot of legs in Plaid Cymru's proposition for a rural Senedd, but I think that it's really missing the trick if we don't include the cities. It's about a food and farming citizens' assembly where we can understand what the needs of a city are and how we can both how the rural communities and the urban communities are interlinked and support one another, and how we can be more cohesive between the two. Oh, okay. I'll finish on that, but can you come back to me for the 20-second statement?
Yes, of course. Yeah, we did say we'd finish about 15:15, so I'm conscious our delegates will want to disappear, and many of you as well. If I gave you 20 seconds, and I will put the stopwatch on, can I ask you one thing you'd like to say to our members, please? I'm going to start in reverse alphabetical order, the other way round. So let's start off with you, Llyr. 20 seconds and the clock's ticking.
Well, read our manifesto, plaid.cymru/manifesto. That's where you'll find all the information. The bottom line is this: Plaid Cymru will put the interests of rural communities at the heart of government in a way that hasn't happened for a long, long time.
Diolch yn fawr, Janet. Sorry, diolch yn fawr, Llyr. And Janet, 20 seconds, the clock is also ticking.
Okay, we haven't had a chance to touch on rural crime, and we would look to, be working with the farmers and landowners on rural crime. But all I would say is, most of the people on this panel, except for Emily, have been in government. They've had, Labour, Plaid themselves have been in government, propped up by the Lib Dems. The Welsh Conservatives have never been in government. I would say just, we are supporters. We've proven it. We have a track record of our time in the Senedd challenging the Welsh Labour government, or Plaid even, and the Lib Dems. I would say on May the 6th, give us a chance to show you our support for you and our farmers.
20 seconds is up. Thank you, Janet. And then Jane, again, same for you, please.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Diolch yn fawr iawn am cyfle ddod yma heno. Just to say really quickly, we need to work together. Surely there is no reason that everybody across all of the political parties who have rural issues at the heart of what they believe, we need to pool our ideas. Let's stop fighting. Let's focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. Thank you, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you, diolch i chi. And Emily, 20 seconds from the Green Party.
First thing to say is this is the first time ever that the Greens can win. No, we can't probably win in a constituency, but we can win on the regional. So if you put your second vote Green, we will win seats this time. And every government needs at least one Green in the Senedd, because we come with a completely fresh perspective. We will put nature, people and climate at the heart of all decision making. So please make your second vote Green if you want a party that is going to support putting their money where their ideas are when it comes to food, farming and nature.
And last but not least, Eluned, 20 seconds, please, from the perspective of the Labour Party.
Well, Mark Drakeford has brought us very carefully and cautiously through the pandemic, and it's only Labour's experience and ambition that can take us to rebuild our nation after this very traumatic experience. I would encourage you to look out for our rural manifesto. I think it's one of the first times that Labour has produced a rural manifesto demonstrating our absolute commitment to going forward, understanding that there has been a lot of pressure on rural communities and looking to the future. So look out for that in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our panelists. We are over time. We've answered, I hope, for most of the questions. I really hope that you all found that very useful. Thank you all to our speakers for stepping into the debate and sharing your honest views and what you want. I'm going to close the session now, but just to say thank you all very much for attending and look forward to seeing you again soon.